We'll begin with a reign of terror. A few murders here and there.
He has figured out a way to be invisible. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Hello and welcome back to Journey Through Sci-Fi, where we journey through the many subgenres of science fiction on screen. I'm Matt.
And I'm James, and in this series we're exploring the sci-fi subgenre of mad science, and in today's episode we will be getting a look at the Invisible Man, which seems like something you wouldn't be able to do with an invisible man.
Yeah, we're going to throw paint on him and just look at the outline of his bandages to understand his terrifying psyche.
What would you do if you were invisible, Matt?
Go on a murderous rampage and terrorise the world.
Yeah, that sounds like you. Sounds like you too.
What would you do?
I don't know. I'd get into all the places I couldn't usually, like all the secret spots, and I'd get all the like free food from all the restaurants and stuff.
Okay, yeah,
that'd be my plan.
Like as it's being served up, or like you go in the kitchen in the restaurant and mix up a spag bowl.
I'd get it as it's being served up and then just really confuse people when they're going in to bite on their burger or something and just find that it's not there. That's the kind of mischief that I would do.
The floating burger thief.
That's
North
me.
London.
That's me, the floating burger thief of North London.
So this is, we're looking at two versions of The Invisible Man. We're looking at a very early one, 1933, absolute classic, directed by James Whale. We've already talked about James Whale on the show a couple of episodes ago. He directed Frankenstein in 1931. And we're looking at The Invisible Man from 2020, directed by Lee Whannell. The last film that came out before the world ended, I seem to remember, The Invisible Man in 2020. And these are both adaptations of H.G. Wells's book, one of them a much closer adaptation than the other.
Yeah, and in that first episode that we had in our Mad Science series, we talked about Mary Shelley, and we talked about how she was the mother of science fiction. And a lot of people could say that H.G. Wells is the father of science fiction. So it's interesting that we're going straight into another big figure in science fiction as we continue our journey through mad science. And The Invisible Man is definitely a mad scientist story, I would say.
Yeah, and Wells is, I think, more recognisably modern science fiction. You can really feel the almost a century's gap between Shelley's book and Wells's book, right? It's much more recognisably what we would consider modern science fiction than the gothic, romantic, poetic writing of Mary Shelley, who I don't think, well, that wouldn't have had the same conceptualization of science fiction that Wells has when he's writing his books. But he owes that debt to her, as anybody writing in the genre does. But I think I can see why people might call him the father of science fiction, because it really is. He's telling these adventure stories about scientists, basically, that really takes hold and shapes the genre.
And the way he tells this sci-fi story as well is quite interesting, because he, as opposed to Shelley, doesn't skirt around the exposition in the same way when he's talking about the transformation that happens in this and the pseudoscience that is happening in this story. So this book came out in 1897, and it was around about the time that X-rays had been discovered. So X-rays were the big science at the time. We were talking about galvanism when we were talking about Frankenstein, all those kind of modern scientific things of the era. So he's got X-rays on his mind, and then he comes up with this quite elaborate explanation as to how Griffin, the main character in The Invisible Man, turns invisible.
Yeah, so in the book he invents like a chemical formula that will render the user completely invisible, and he's tested it on his cat or something. But he can't change back, which is something that carries over to the 33 film. So yeah, he's kind of worked with these chemicals, and I guess, I don't know, is there some scientific mumbo jumbo about X-rays thrown in for good measure because they're in the news at the time of writing?
Yeah, he's got a whole thing in there about how it's altering the body's refractive index to match that of the air. And it makes...
Very Star Trek.
Exactly. Very Star Trek. It makes light pass through it without being reflected. And then there's something about the formula doing something that... So basically the formula drains all pigmentation from his body, which includes bleaching his blood. Ooh, lovely. You mentioned about the cat as well. And as a cat owner, would you ever test a dangerous chemical on your cat?
No. And also the only thing more annoying and dangerous than a cat is, of course, a cat that you can't see. I would not recommend having an invisible cat in your house. That is going to magnify your woes tenfold if you're a cat owner.
So no invisible cats. That's where you draw the line, invisible cats. But everything else is on the table.
And you wouldn't get to see their lovely cute faces, James. Why would you make them invisible? What a waste of time.
That's true. Yeah, this book is one of those early science fiction stories which has all those mad scientist elements in it. And it's kind of building up this mad scientist archetype from a very early period in time, like 1897. To think of science in this way is quite an intriguing thing, that it's still this kind of magical pseudoscience. And it's interesting that H.G. Wells has put the science into it, because before then there were stories about invisibility. Like you'd have magical cloaks and, I don't know, helmets that would make you invisible. So like invisibility has been something that's long been in literature, and people have been thinking about it for a long time. Like, oh, what if nobody could see you and you could get around and cause mischief and do all the things that you want to do without people seeing?
Invisibility and flight, isn't it? There's the sort of two stereotypical superpowers that you think of. How do you answer that question, James? What would you rather have, flight or invisibility as a superpower?
I mean, flight. Yeah.
Flight, yeah. It's more practical.
It's more practical.
And also this is, like there's no definitive precautionary tale about the superpower of flight. Whereas, stories about invisibility tend to be like The Invisible Man, precautionary tales, and generally speaking, it's not great to turn invisible. Harry Potter gets away with it.
But The Invisible Man has been seen throughout time since this story as well. There's lots of iterations of this, and it's a story that gets told again and again in the same way that Frankenstein is constantly reinvented for different generations. The Invisible Man is one of those creatures, one of those monsters, universal monsters that keeps coming back again and again.
Yeah, and as we will get to later this episode, I think possibly more adaptable to modern audiences than some of the others. And with that tease to later in the episode, James, shall we make a start talking about the first adaptation that we're going to talk about today, the 1933 James Whale Universal Pictures Invisible Man?
Yes, let's do it.
Say an invisible man. I'll show you who I am and what I am. Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death. The whole world's frightened to death. How do you like that,
Have you seen this version of The Invisible Man before?
No, I hadn't. And I'll be honest with you, James, I had no idea it was so good, to be honest.
I was very excited for you to watch this one because I told you before.
You talked it up a bit, but when you were telling me about it, your description was like very reserved. Like you didn't want to tell me too much, and you didn't want to spoil it.
I think the main thing for me with you watching this was to get your reaction to the humor, because it's so funny. This is like a very dark comic telling of the Invisible Man.
Yeah, and camp as well. We talked about camp a bit when we talked about Frankenstein. I think James Whale, being the common denominator between the two, is bringing a real sense of camp to it that Claude Rains is absolutely responding to and jumping on and having a lot of fun playing with.
Yeah, so this film comes out in 1933. So James Whale previously had done Frankenstein in 1931. In between this and then, he did a film called The Old Dark House, which also featured Boris Karloff in it. I think he plays like a evil caretaker something
See
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's got a very humorous tone to it as well as being dark. So you can see James Whale really getting into who he is as a director, as an auteur of the time. He's got this theatrical background. He's been a theatre actor, and he's really sort of getting that across in his films. And this feels like Universal have given him a second go and have been like, right, make the film that you want to make. You did so well with doing Frankenstein. Let's do something different. And there was also all of this stuff happening with him and Universal at the time, because they were really pushing for him to do a sequel to Frankenstein. They wanted him to do that straight away, but Whale said, no, I'd like to do something different first. So he comes along and does The Invisible Man, the H.G. Wells story. So it's a big deal for the studio as well. H.G. Wells has signed off on the rights, and they're here and they're making this new film. So there's quite a lot riding on it, it feels like, at the time in 1933.
Yeah, and they kind of stick the landing, I guess, don't they? Because it's kind of the establishment of this stable of horror characters that Universal's building up at the time. They've had this enormous success with Frankenstein and Dracula, and then coming back. I like the fact that Carl, what's his name, Lemley, I think is how you say his name, the head of Universal at the time.
Mr. Lemley.
Mr. Lemley welcomes you. Oh yeah, I remember. I like entrusting it to James Whale, because this is a time before directors are the big names and are considered, the creators of the film, but they are obviously recognised as a very, very important part in the process by the big figures. So bringing back someone like James Whale, who clearly has a fantastic vision for these films, is just a great move from Universal and pays off incredibly well.
And it does feel like he's building on all the stuff that he did in Frankenstein as well. He's already got this kind of aesthetic to his films, the kind of gothic nature that he added into Frankenstein, which he was drawing from that original stage adaptation, which he drew a lot of inspiration from. But in this as well, I feel like he's got more free reign, and that kind of comes out in the script writing. The sort of more comic elements of it, I feel like, are something which James Whale's really put into this. It's got a very similar cast of characters as well, because you've got a love interest. The love interest, I don't think, is in H.G. Wells' initial book. They've kind of thrown that in for this one.
Mm.
And then you've also got the friend of this mad scientist, who is...
like Victor in Frankenstein.
Exactly. Yeah. And he also has a thing for the lead
weird
actress.
that, isn't it?
Yeah, and they keep throwing that in as this kind of weird love triangle. But in this as well, it feels like Whale was able to end it the way that he wanted to end it, because it doesn't have that kind of forced happy ending that you get in Frankenstein.
No, it doesn't. No, not to the degree of Frankenstein. I was still a bit surprised by a little bit of moralizing in the last sort of 20 seconds of the movie.
Okay.
He learns his lesson like literally on his deathbed seconds before dying, doesn't he? And that made me, I don't know, it raised an eyebrow for me, because this is a gloriously silly, deranged movie. And he's a silly and deranged main character. And then there's just this turn at the very end where he's about to meet his maker, and he's like, I meddled with things that no man should. Like he's finally coming back to himself and understanding the gravity of his crimes. I didn't hate it, but I was just a bit like, we don't need that. I've been enjoying this character. He's absolutely mad as a box of hammers, and that's great.
I feel like that's more of a remnant from the H.G. Wells book, though, because I think what they've done with this, from what I understand, is they've added a bit more gruesomeness and a few more violent elements to this Invisible Man, and the way that he's like committing crimes with greater brutality than in H.G. Wells's original story, I think, is an element which came into play, because this film was also, a lot of people have talked about how this film also drew inspiration from a different Invisible Man story, that of Philip Wiley's The Murderer Invisible, which was written in 1931, which Universal also happened to own the rights to. So it feels like that kind of fed into this as well. At least that's what's speculated by a lot of critics. And that one sounds mental, that story. So it's got a criminal who is stealing this invisibility formula. He's committing all these crimes. Somewhere along the line, there's an invisible octopus, potentially invisible rats, all of this stuff going on. And apparently there's a lot more sort of horror elements and chaos to the story. And I mean, there's definitely chaos in this film. What Griffin is getting up to. His crimes start really small and they kind of escalate as the film goes on.
They escalate exponentially, I would say. He goes from I don't know, impish. We talked about how Mr. Hyde is impish, a lot of his behaviour, and then he also escalates into much darker stuff in that adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde. And again, we see a similar thing here where Griffin is quite impish a lot of the time. You know, he's like stealing a bike and throwing it at people, stealing a hat, and then it seems
he pushes a pram over.
That's the most serious thing he does in that specific rampage, I think.
Yeah.
But it's mostly, you know, that sort of thing. And then later on, he's still being quite impish, and then the scene cuts and he diverts a train so that the entire train full of people goes off a bridge. And I was a bit like, whoa, I didn't know we were doing that. Calm down, everyone.
Yeah, like you say, it escalates throughout. And I love the fact you were back to using impish and using those kind of words to describe these scientists, because what was the other? What we used? Goblin as well. I think Frankenstein was a goblin. And yeah, so now we're back to imps. So I wonder how many more scientists are going to have this kind of nature to them.
Yeah, and well, scientists devolving into fantasy creatures as by way of comparison anyway.
Yeah, it's that idea of the transformation that they go through, which is a constant in all these mad scientist films, it seems. The film opens with this mystery to it, doesn't it? You don't know what exactly's happening. You know, because we've all seen The Invisible Man. We know kind of how he looks. But you can imagine when audiences first saw this and you see this man rock up to an old inn, like a pub, and he's all bandaged up. And then there's this big reveal as to the fact that he's invisible and all of this kind of stuff.
Well, I don't know about that, because I was wondering about that, because I mean, first of all, the film is called The Invisible Man. It's based on a very famous book by H.G. Wells that is not that old. You know, it'll still be in print, still be popular in 1933. It's only about 30 years old, and you know, it'll still be a very popular book. And the film's called The Invisible Man. So I think you know what's going on. I think you know exactly who he is. And I think this film really revels in the spectacle of him and the sight of him. Because you do very early on, you don't see his invisibility. You never see his invisibility. He's invisible. But you don't see the reveal for a bit. They hold back on that. But you do get lovely close-ups of Claude Rains in the bandages and the goggles. And that's all part of the spectacle, isn't it? That's the monster in this movie, is seeing Claude Rains in the whole Invisible Man getup. It's the contradiction of the Invisible Man, is that he has an iconic look that is entirely visible, and then you go into the later scenes and you have to establish that and create this mythical imagery around him before you then do the special effect and he disappears, and then he's in the film a bit less because he's not visible. But yeah, I think that element of spectacle ties into the audience having some expectations of seeing the Invisible Man.
Ah, that makes sense now, thinking about that. Yeah, because the thing is, though, as well, you don't actually see the man behind the Invisible Man. So Claude Rains puts on an amazing performance in this, but the majority of it is just vocal. It's just purely his voice, this really theatrical, dramatic voice that is throughout the entire film. And apparently Whale was looking for a specific voice when he was doing the casting, because he quickly realized you're not going to show this actor's face, so it needs to be a voice that can carry the film. And interesting as well that Claude Rains, apparently his voice is kind of fabricated because he was originally a Cockney.
Oh, right.
So he had like a really thick Cockney accent. And then as he got older and started treading the boards in London, he started to put on this voice. So
Went to RADA.
Yeah, went to RADA of the day. And so now he's got this really theatrical voice, and it's so instantly recognizable. But then when he was using this voice in auditions, people were like, oh, it's too put on, it's too over the top. But then Wales saw how it would work in this film, and that's what got him this role. And this was like only his second film. I think he'd done one in the UK before, which wasn't very well known. And then he gets cast in this and he's away.
It's sort of mid-Atlantic is what they call it, isn't it? The posh American, like Fraser Crane has a mid-Atlantic accent. That's the kind of accent that he has. I mean, his voice is amazing. I assume it's all done in post, right? Because he's got the bandages all over his head. He won't be recorded, be muffled. And he has that kind of like, he sounds like he's in a booth, basically, recording his voice. But what a voice. It does carry the film. He carries the film. He's amazing. He's absolutely phenomenal in the film. Just gloriously camp all the way through. Even when he's derailing a train and killing 100 people, it's still it's funny, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
he's laughing like a madman and pulling all the levers and just having a really good time with it. It's brilliant. Brilliant work from Rains.
It feels like, again, the kind of evolution of what we saw in Frankenstein. Like, obviously, Colin Clive as Victor Frankenstein was amazing. And we talked about how the way he delivers those lines so passionately. And then this is kind of a even more hammed up version of that, with the lines that Rains is delivering, like lines where he's saying, I'm going to knock his brains out, and you're a dirty little rat, you're a dirty little card. Like, all of these fun, descriptive ways he's talking about stuff. I mean, they're not exactly fun. He's talking about knocking someone's brains out and beating them to death, and then how they're going to die in gruesome ways. But he makes it fun in the way that he's delivering the lines.
Yeah. He says things like, We'll begin my reign of terror. A few murders here and there, like so casually talking about murder. Yeah, it's very unserious, isn't it?
Well, that's part of the fun of it, isn't it? And he really adds the mad to the mad scientist, because this is probably the first time we really truly see a completely mad scientist on film. At least it feels like it. This is like a big moment in sci-fi cinema, where you've got this scientist who's completely delusional.
Yeah, and there's no messing about, because I think it is all spectacle, this film. Griffin is mad from the first reel. As soon as it starts playing, he's getting lodging so that he can be mad in private and try and unmadden himself, but it doesn't work. But there's no descent into it. There's no building up to the experiment. There's no being driven mad by the consequences of it. He just starts mad. It's what the audience want to see. Get into it. Let's see him in the bandages. Let's design that monster makeup and costume and just get into it. It does away with a lot of the pathos and story and characterization of Frankenstein, and is just kind of straight in there 100 miles an hour from the beginning. This is what audiences are going to enjoy. Let's just give them what they want.
And it's quite reflective of the times as well. You talked about the reign of terror that he mentions. This was on the verge of people like Hitler and Mussolini being around. The kind of fears of totalitarianism is in the air, the rise of dictators. All of this stuff feels very zeitgeisty. And the fact he talks about this reign of terror and this invisible army that he's going to summon when he becomes, and sort of like the bidding war for all the invisibility formula.
He wants to sell an invisible army, to the highest bidder, who will then march across the world. A scary concept in 1933. Scary concept at any time.
Yeah, it's a mad concept. So again, the mad scientist element of it, and that. Yeah, it's scary, and it adds to the horror of this film as much as anything else. And then you've got the transformation. So we talked about how the transformation works in the book. So they add a few extra bits in this, don't they? There's the flower from India.
Monocane, I think.
Monocane, that's it. And his colleague, who I think is the father of
Flora.
the love interest. And he explains that this monocane actually can cause madness, as well as dyes dogs white or something, I think he says in the description.
Dyes dogs white and drives them mad, yeah.
Yeah, not something you want to be messing around with.
I think a bleaching drug would, if it could affect your whole body and transform you, it would just turn you white, wouldn't it? I thought it was interesting that they mentioned that, because I was like, oh, that's actually more realistic than turning you invisible. Like if there was some sort of drug that could bleach every bit of you, then you would just become completely white all over, wouldn't you? Not invisible.
No, not invisible. But again, the pseudoscience works somehow, but
Sure
they
does.
explicitly say that it will make him mad. And I think that's something that they've added into this deliberately, just to kind of explain away why he is so off the wall when he's talking. He's not just like your average scientist, is he? He's lost his mind by this point, or at least he's very close to losing his mind.
Yeah. He's got all the campness and bombastic acting of Henry Frankenstein. I was trying to think of his name, not Victor Frankenstein. Henry Frankenstein in the earlier film. But there's something more, I don't know, entertaining, I think is the word, about a scientist that's done it to himself, rather than a scientist that creates something and then is driven mad by the acquisition of the knowledge and the effects of his creation. But to do it to yourself, and then it drives you completely mad and renders you very dangerous and psychopathic. I don't know, he's a more compelling character, and he's a bad guy, so he's just a more fun bad guy, I think.
And he's done it to himself without having an antidote as well, which is quite essential. He just sort of brushes that off, like, oh, it's fine. I'm going to create this antidote as I go. I'm going to do it on the fly. It's fine.
Yeah, but he's stark raving mad, isn't he, by the time he's doing that? So he wants to create an antidote, but he's also very interested in talking about his reign of terror, subduing the planet, creating an army of invisible men, selling them to the highest bidder, and everyone will worship him. All of that is just sort of overtaking any conversation he wants to have about developing an antidote. That's his original driving purpose, but he just steadily across the film is losing sight of that because he's more interested in the reign of terror.
Yeah, and his reign of terror that starts so humbly with just knocking over beer glasses and pushing over a grandfather clock and just being a little imp. But you talked about the sort of the special effects a little bit earlier. What did you think of the special effects and how they've aged? Do you know how they did them as well?
I had to look them up, and I wanted to look them up, and they are very good and they look very good. But this must be like the oldest film I've seen where I see a special effect and I didn't immediately, or, you don't intuitively know how they've done it. I love watching really old films, Méliès films, but all of the effects there you can explain mostly with stopping the camera, changing what's in front of the camera and starting the camera again. For the most part, you can achieve a lot of that, or by using miniatures, essentially. Whereas in this film, I just had no idea how they did it. I've looked it up. It's essentially how blue screen works, isn't it? But years and years before blue and green screen. But that is essentially how they've done it. But all I knew was this is way before blue screen. And that's the only thing in my head that I can think of to explain how this was done. So I was completely befuddled by it. And they just look amazing.
So it's like they wrap him in black velvet and they put the black velvet in the background as well to change the background of the scene.
Yeah, so everything's black velvet apart from the bandages and the clothes, I think.
Yeah.
And then you can just lay the negative film over the top of a normal shot of the room that it's going to be in, and then the two go together. The black doesn't contribute anything to the final image, and then so it's like chroma keying out the black bits.
And there's one shot in this where Griffin is looking into a mirror, and for that apparently they had to do it basically 4 times. So they did
my
4
God.
different shots so they could get him looking in the mirror as well. So you've got him front on and you've got him behind. And just all of these, again, it's like you said in one of the previous episodes, it's the mad science of the filmmaker.
Yeah, the behind the scenes.
Yeah, which I think is great.
There's even an amazing shot where you see his footsteps in snow. And again, I couldn't figure out how they did that. And that's fairly simple. It's just like a wooden board under the ground with footstep shapes cut out of it like a cookie cutter, and then fake snow on top. And you just pull down the cutout and it lowers down the footsteps. But it's brilliant. It looks great.
So yeah, because I couldn't figure out how they did that. And then they seem like simple things, but they're not simple things. They are having to just create these out of nowhere.
And that's why I think that James Whale is a man of spectacle, and he is interested in that. The way he shoots and frames Griffin before you see any of that, when it's just the goggles and the bandages, it's close-ups on a slightly low angle, so he's very imposing and filling the frame with this almost comic book character kind of iconic face. That comes early on. It's very spectacly, and then you have all these effects. They're incredible. And then also just the very end of the film ends on a special effect. It's the last shot in the film, and it's partially necessary because he becomes visible again, right, when he dies. They speculate that's going to happen, and then that is what happens. And that's a more simple special effect, which is that he just fades in. But there's the skull. He does the skull before the flesh, which again is just that, like, it's just that sense of spectacle. Just give him one more special effect. They could have just faded him in, Claude Rains' face, but they do a skull first and then the skin over the top of it, and it's like, yes, one more cool special effect just to close it out and give you that gross skull as well, a bit of grossness at the end. Like, it's just brilliant. I think that's James Whale with the sense of spectacle just throughout this film.
And that spectacle isn't just in the sort of special effects. I think everything that he's put into this is the spectacle element of it. Like, even down to its eclectic cast of side characters, all of these kind of like locals that they run into, they're all a bit larger than life. Like the woman who owns the inn, the way she comes in, her sort of like high pitched scream, like, "Oh no, we'll get you a room. We don't really have one at the moment." And then the farmer who finds him in the barn, and he like over the top sort of creeps out of the barn. All of these extra characters, the policemen, which are bumbling about and getting chucked around by the Invisible Man and sneaking around, and the one who accidentally sprays a cat thinking hits him. All of these characters make up the tapestry of the film, and they give it a sense of realism.
I think there's an element of that, like the sort of sense of stock characters that you get in theatre is coming through here. I love the police officers. Jaffa's the local one. He's invisible, that's what he is.
I love the fact that they say like, "Oh yeah, we will give you £1,000 if you tell us how we can defeat the Invisible Man, how we can capture
police work.
him." Yeah, great.
But again, it's that sensationalization of it, isn't it? It's broadcasting out the crimes of this serial killer, essentially, and saying like, "Dial in with your ideas of how we can catch the Invisible Man." It's making it public. It's making it like an event for the whole community in this film to dial in. And you can kind of see it in the characters as well. The characters that do call in with their ideas, they're sort of relishing it. They're like, "Oh, hold on, I've got a good idea." Like, like they're kind of like that. And they're obviously enjoying that. And it seems like they're having fun at that point. It just becomes this whole sensational display for the public to partake in. Again,
it's the fun elements of this film. And I had a lot of fun watching it again because it just takes you on a ride, and it's so ridiculous with the stuff that's happening, but it's still got this tinge of horror to it, hasn't it? Because what he's doing is terrifying. Like the idea that this guy can be anywhere, you can't see him. It's scary.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But then they just take the edge off that by making him such a larger than life funny character, I guess.
And having seen this version of the Invisible Man, can you see how it's gone on to shape like sci-fi in general now, because I feel like it's such a archetype of sci-fi, this particular Invisible Man, like the bandages, the way
Yeah.
he looks, the kind of stuff that he's doing, the way that the experiment changes him and makes him lose his mind a bit. Do you reckon you could see that like reverberating through history?
Yeah, there's some iconography or iconographical elements that I think resonate even in modern cinema. You know, like the way that Disney will make The Mandalorian, and you've got a main character who is just like looks like Boba Fett, basically takes off his helmet maybe twice in the whole show, and then the other main character is a little teddy bear, basically, with no human actor attached to it. Those are just their costumes and their character designs, aren't they? And the Invisible Man is, I mean, Claude Rains is so essential to the success of this film as a human being performing the role. But you've got two elements. One, which is a man who is invisible, the Invisible Man. So you don't need anyone on screen. Anyone can play that. And then the other element is the costume design that creates this monster of the Invisible Man that is the lasting icon of this film, is the bandages and the glasses and the hat and the coat and all of that stuff. Those two things together mean that you can endlessly remake this film, recast it, borrow from it, do what you want, and it's very easy to recreate and just borrow the kind of imagery of it. And it's a sort of self-perpetuating trope, I guess, it then becomes, of the Invisible Man. And then you carry with it sort of like elements of Griffin's personality, like, well, he's invisible, but he's also dangerous. That's not inherently linked, but it can be, and you can carry that over as a trope.
And those tropes do get carried over in all of the subsequent Universal Pictures films of the Invisible Man. There's just such, like we said at the start, there's an abundance of Invisible Man films. They've got The Invisible Man Returns, The Invisible Woman. They've got The Invisible Agent, when he becomes like a secret agent in World War II.
Oh, that's interesting. Is he a good guy in he must be a good guy in The Invisible Agent if he's, well, it depends what side he's on. Yeah. But I assume he's working for the heroes.
Yeah, he's the grandson of the original Invisible Man, and he's using invisibility to fight the Nazis. So very much reflecting the context of the time. And then they even go down sort of the comedy route later on as well. Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man.
Of course they do.
Of course they do. And it goes, there's an amazing Invisible Man skit in a film where they basically recreate that first scene in The Invisible Man, but it's a guy who's just naked. And everyone's just sort of going along with it. I forget what the film is, but there's going to be an abundance of those kind of like piss takes of it because it's so well known.
Yeah.
And there's always a scene where the Invisible Man is naked, and it's sort of like it's the time on film where you can sort of allude to that, so they kind of get a bit more sexy with it on occasion. I was
surprised they didn't make more of that in this film, because it's very salacious, isn't it? But he sort of just treats it matter-of-factly that he has to be naked, and it's an inconvenience for him because he's always cold.
So again, there's loads and loads of different versions of the Invisible Man that have gone on and continue to go on. And speaking of which, the next film which we're going to cover is a more modern take on the Invisible Man, one which really goes down the more serious psychological horror route. So shall we start talking about Leigh Whannell's 2020 adaptation of The Invisible Man?
Hi listeners, hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to support us and get access to hundreds of hours of bonus episodes, you can sign up to our Patreon.
We've got discussions on all the latest sci-fi films in cinemas, the Bad Movie Bunker, and Patrons' Picks, as well as mini-series covering your favourite franchises.
Patrons get to have their say on what we cover, both over on Patreon and right here on the main show too.
So if you want to join, head over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Now, back to the episode.
Adrian. He was a sociopath. He said that I could never leave him. He controlled how I looked and what I wore. Then it was controlling when I left the house. And eventually, what I thought. I'm sorry, I can't take you with me. I'm not gonna leave you with that thing on.
Are you okay?
What happened to him?
Adrian's dead.
Listen, you're getting your freedom back, okay?
He said that wherever I went, he would find me, walk right up to me, and I wouldn't be able to see him.
Adrian is dead.
He's not dead. He has figured out a way to be invisible.
So we've covered a Lee Whannell film already on the series, haven't we? Because way back when we did our AI series, we looked at Upgrade when we did an episode on that and RoboCop.
Yes, that was a long time ago. I would need an AI chip inserted into my head in order to properly remember that. But that's sort of same universe or whatever, isn't it? Because this is... So Adrian from this film is the CEO of the company that owns the chips. It's the same company anyway. Cobalt that he runs is the company from Upgrade.
Oh, that's a lovely little Easter egg.
Yeah.
One which definitely went over my head when I was watching this.
Me too. I just read it afterwards. I don't think it's integral to the story, and I don't remember the story of Upgrade well enough to know if it's integral to that story. But and I don't think the same actor appears in The Invisible Man. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so. But anyway, there's some sort of connection there which Lee Whannell's put in, which I quite enjoy. But going back to this film that came out in 2020, this came out at the time, you know the time.
I know the time, yeah. Yeah, this really felt like it was the last film to come out before the world ended. And particularly because, so it came out late, like the last day of February, didn't it, in 2020? And then here in the UK, we went into lockdown, I believe, March the 16th. I believe I remember the very day. But I remember because for the entirety of 2020, which felt like the longest year ever, all the buses in London had The Invisible Man posters on it because nobody else released a movie. So no one else was spending any money on bus advertising. So they just left them up. And it went on for months. Do you remember that? Like it seemed like every bus in London had even in like November 2020, it was all Invisible Man posters on the buses.
That's something I didn't think about, but of course that makes complete sense.
I didn't see the movie. I never saw the movie when it came out, but it's one of my like lasting memories of lockdown is that it seemed like every bus had adverts for this because I was just very aware that like no movies got released after this.
I mean, great for their marketing in terms of like visibility.
Yeah.
Ironic. But this also, because they didn't last in the cinemas, obviously, it went to digital early so people could rent it. So maybe the combination of seeing all of these buses with all the promotional materials on and having that as the only new film you can watch from home contributed to some of its success. I mean, there's more to it than that with when it comes to its success because it's a good film, I would say.
Yeah. Of course, yes. I think it could have made a lot more than 140 million if it had a proper theatrical run under normal circumstances. But that's for Blumhouse with their mini budget ethos, that's a lovely little bit of change, isn't it? Especially as the world is shutting down.
Yeah, because they did this on a really small budget of just 7 million. And it's also funny that this was initially planned to be part of the Dark Universe monster project that they were doing at Universal.
Oh dear.
Yeah, the one which completely crashed.
We need to talk about the Dark Universe on the Bad Movie Bunker at some point, don't we?
Oh, yes. It all went crashing down when they put out that 2017 version of The Mummy. Yeah, they had all those grand plans, didn't they? They were going to have like the Wolf Man, they were going to have the Invisible Man in this, link them all together. But because it was just such a flop, they were like, nope, can't do any more of these.
Yeah, well, I think it's for the best in that case, isn't it? And actually, it's good that this film isn't kind of weighed down by connections to the 2017 Mummy film, because I don't think that would have done it any favors. Imagine if there was like a post-credit scene where like Tom Cruise shows up and wants to recruit.
Oh my God,
Cecilia
Avengers
or something, I don't
style.
know. Yeah.
I can totally see it happening. Oh no. But luckily that wasn't the case. But I think having it with this smaller budget does the film wonders. And it also really modernizes that initial story from H.G. Wells in a very interesting way. So what did you think about how they've gone about modernizing this story for a 2020 audience?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a total flip in the focus. There's multiple things are inverted and flipped and just turned on their head from what we've seen in the 33 version. But principally, it's the focus on a different character. So we follow Griffin on his so-called reign of terror, basically, in the 33 version. But we're just focusing on his primary victim, one victim, who is the main character of this story. And he's not fun. It's not funny. Although, interestingly, like some of the things that he does to Cecilia have an almost impish quality, like stealing her work before a job interview. That's a prank. It has that slight impishness to it, but it's this direct, cruel, targeted meanness that he's inflicting on her. It's not just a random act of impishness. It's a calculated act of impishness that will have a very specific psychological effect that he knows it will have on his victim. But yeah, it's focusing that story on that one character. That feels like the biggest change, and taking the focus away from the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man becomes much more invisible in this film.
Yeah, the impish stuff again. I think for me, this felt very sort of poltergeisty.
Yeah, it's a ghost story for the first half, isn't it?
Yeah, because Cecilia's being haunted by the idea of this abusive partner who she believes to be dead. And also it goes down a different kind of route in terms of explaining the invisibility. So it does this quite early, doesn't it? Because Adrian Griffin is a camouflage specialist, isn't he?
He works in the field of optics.
The field of optics, and in doing that he's created technology to do with optics and how people see things. And very early on in the film you see Cecilia go past all of these different suits, and she goes past the suit which turns out to be the suit that grants Adrian this invisibility. And the suit is great. The way they kind of show that and depict that on screen is brilliant. And it's a great modernizing of the Invisible Man from this mysterious chemical formula to something that's quite tangible and I think quite believable in this story.
Yeah, well, believable to us in 2020, as I'm sure a mysterious drug from places far away would be believable to audiences in 33. I'm sure, 90 years from now it might seem a bit silly and dated, but yeah, it feels believable. And it's another inversion of the concept, isn't it? Because Claude Rains has to undress and become fragile in a way in order to utilize his invisibility, whereas for Adrian in this film it's a suit that he puts on. And there's something protective about being in a suit, isn't there? He is clothed and the suit empowers him, almost like a superhero as well. I think there's a lot of like superhero coding to the film in the fact that he's putting on this special suit that gives him an ability. So that feels like a massive inversion to how actually fragile Griffin is in the 33 version.
And in this version as well, we're not focusing on Adrian, like you said, we're not focusing on Griffin. We're focusing on Cecilia, who is his victim, and it's very much from the victim's point of view. Do you think that centering the story on Cecilia, does that make it more of a horror? because in the other one, you're kind of following the monster. You're following Griffin on his reign of terror, like you said. But in this, because you are the victim the whole time, does it make it more terrifying to watch?
I mean, maybe it does, but I don't know if it's just the centering on Cecilia that does that. I think it's a wholly different tone of voice in the film, and that's what makes it horror and scary, is just a completely different approach. And I think that centering it on Cecilia complements that change in approach. But I don't know if it's inherent. I'd be interested to see, because I haven't seen Hollow Man. Who's the focus in Hollow Man? Because that's another sort of more on the horror side of things with an Invisible Man story. Does that follow Kevin Bacon, or does that follow the victims more?
It's been a while since I've seen that, but as that film gets more and more down the rabbit hole, seem to remember like Kevin Bacon taking on more almost supernatural strength powers from his invisibility, which didn't make much sense. But him becoming more of a monstrous figure, but I don't think it necessarily follows him as much.
Okay. Well, maybe it's just the natural way of doing it. I think is, you can't really follow a proper monstrous character, even though Griffin is one in the 33 version, because it's played much more camply and it's a bit silly. I think it's okay to follow him.
Because Adrian isn't this silly camp character, is he? He's not Griffin. He's not this like crazy laughing guy taking his pants off. He is this menacing figure who we don't like. Literally, he is the Invisible Man for the majority of the film. You don't see him. You don't get much backstory about him. He's quite elusive. You hear things from Cecilia about the way he treated her and the things that she was subjected to, but you don't see anything of him. You don't see what he looks like properly. He is this mysterious figure who is just menacing in the background throughout the first half of the film, at least.
Yeah, he's just a bastard from the get-go. And he's not driven mad by his science. His mad science is an extension of his existing madness. He is a real piece of shit. And we can trust that through how Cecilia is portrayed in the opening scene. There's no invisibility there, but she's very clearly a woman scared for her life and trying to leave her partner, who lives in like a compound with a concrete wall around it, and chases her through the woods and tries to punch his way into the car that she escapes in. So, and that's got nothing to do with the invisibility of it all. That's just a genuinely scary, abusive man. And then the mad science enters into it as an extension of that. So he's already a scary horror villain, or has the capacity for that at the start of the film. And then you add in the sci-fi element, the science, the mad science, and it just empowers him like a supervillain to go on a rampage.
And he is mad in a different kind of way, isn't he? He's very measured in his madness. But also that madness really flares up. Like when he punches that car window, you can see he is literally mad about stuff. He's got that anger to him. And that scene you were talking about, that initial scene in the compound, that's an interesting one as well, because again, you've got this kind of inversion where you've got Cecilia trying to be invisible, trying to get away and trying not to be seen. And then for the rest of the film, it's Adrian who isn't being seen. And then there's also this element of Cecilia not being seen or believed by other people. So it works on lots of different levels with these metaphors that are at play in the film.
Yeah, and the way we see her as well as the audience, mostly her, but other characters as well. But the camera work in this film is amazing and creepy. There's like, well, it's like voyeuristic, isn't it? The way they're shot.
Oh, yeah. It freaked me out. Every time I saw a shot, I was looking all around.
Yes, yeah.
Just trying to see if anything moves or... Oh.
But there's very little of that, isn't there? Like the film absolutely encourages you to look at it in that way, and you can't take your eyes off it. But they don't do that sort of sight gag sort of thing where there's a footstep or something like that. You know, they actually keep that to a minimum. But the camera sways very slowly and smoothly, like it's gazing across a room with a will of its own. Sometimes that's because Adrian is in the room, and we know that. But there's other scenes where I don't think we necessarily know Adrian, or he might not even really be introduced yet as the Invisible Man. But the camera is still gazing around the room like that, and it'll just sway to the side as if we're going to see something wobble and move, and then it just sways back to Cecilia, and nothing actually happens. But that movement is just creepy and unpleasant, and it feels unnatural. It doesn't sort of obey typical camera movements, I guess, that we're used to. So it sort of just sets you on the back foot a little bit and creates that sense of unease, which is lovely scene setting for a horror film.
Yeah, just showing those empty spaces in the corners and things like that. And also just pretending like, well, not pretending, but sometimes it feels like they're POV shots, but you don't quite know.
Yeah.
There's
Peeking
all of
around
that.
a corner in a hallway and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's really off-putting. And it isn't that kind of... Lee Winnell has said a lot of times he doesn't want that kind of jump scare horror. That's not what he's trying to do with this. It's all about suspense and building that up.
Well,
And
there's one absolutely massive
Yeah,
jump scare about halfway through the film, isn't there?
I mean, that... Yeah. Do you want to talk about that one?
The paint. I'm talking about the paint. I don't think it is paint, actually. I mentioned paint earlier in the episode, but with the speed that he washes it off, I think it's something else. But she throws a can of white liquid on down out of the attic, and he's... Oh, I'll be honest with you, James, he's a lot closer to her than I was expecting him to be. And it scared the shit out of me.
Great. I love that bit.
And also, it's the first time that we don't know. I don't think we've seen the suits in the distance in the lab, but I don't think we really have a lot of context at that point in the film. And I wasn't really expecting him to be bumpy.
Bumpy.
A bumpy robot is what he looked like.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. I was obviously expecting just a man who is invisible. So he's got that creepy texture all over him when we see the paint land on him.
Oh, yeah, it's freaky, that moment. And you're right, that is it's like a calculated jump scare. It's built,
well deployed.
It's earned it. It's earned that
Yeah.
moment. And all those other little bits as well in there where it's kind of like there's the breath when Cecilia goes out.
Yeah.
And then you see a breath behind her. And also when you think that he's sat in the chair when Cecilia's in the room in bed, and then he's not in the chair, and then she pulls the sheet, and then the sheet doesn't move. All of these little elements which are just there to trick her and get her doubting what's actually happening. And then it gets more and more graphic to the point where she's being kicked, she's being strangled and lifted up in the air. And again, you're seeing, you don't really know what's happening. And it's again, all of this just tension and this, like, no one believing her and this gaslighting. It really gets to you when you watch this film.
Yeah. It's an upsetting journey that she goes on, and it feels just incredibly personal. There's no reign of terror here, really, in the same way. Griffin wants to terrorize the whole world, and he has these truly insane delusions of grandeur, whereas Adrian just has this one horrible obsession with a person, which makes that, it just makes it feel more real, because there is a very believable and unpleasant dynamic between two believable characters. And Adrian's a brilliant character. He's absolutely horrible, but he's a brilliant character. But it's Elizabeth Moss who is on screen doing the work, and it's an incredible performance from her. She's such a great actor, and it's really fun to see her do some proper horror work. She gets to do some good stuff like that in The Handmaid's Tale, but this is quite traditional horror acting done brilliantly well.
Yeah, it's her. It's like the reverse again of what we've seen with Rains, where Rains had to do it all vocally.
Yeah.
All of this theatrical acting that he's doing with his voice. Whereas Elizabeth Moss, it's just that terror in her face and the tension that she's holding in her whole entire body when she's moving around, and seeing that trajectory of her character as well into that complete, like, almost oblivion when she's in that, like, psychiatric ward. She's just like lost all hope. At least that's what it seems like. And just still having that tenacity to try and plan how she's going to get Adrian and improve what she's been saying is true.
Yeah. I'll tell you something that Elizabeth Moss is so good at, is that performance of someone who is just barely restraining an enormous amount of emotion, that she's just keeping it all in from exploding and screaming or punching or whatever. It's quite, and I think you see it a lot in Handmaid's Tale. You see it a lot in even in Mad Men, where she's got to like not say the things she's thinking in Mad Men. But I think it makes for a very satisfying final act in this film, where to give that character a gun. Like, imagine handing Offred a gun, a gun in Handmaid's Tale, and allowing her to seek vengeance, or telling Peggy in Mad Men that she can say whatever she wants to Don. Just like unrestraining a character like that, unrestraining an Elizabeth Moss character, handing her a gun and saying, "Go and get your revenge." It's very satisfying.
Yeah, and you really built up to that as well, because of all the stuff she's gone through throughout this film. The moment when her sister and her are in the restaurant, what did you feel about that particular moment in the film?
Well, I gasped out loud, James. This film, I haven't had as enjoyable of an experience of a kind of like schlocky horror movie, like gasping out loud and being scared. I don't like being scared too much, so just like one big jump scare in a film is kind of the perfect amount. And then gasping out loud at an unexpected thing. I think Lee Wannell is very good at his twists and turns and shocking violence, but deployed at the right time. He is really good at that stuff, isn't he?
It was the shocking violence of, like, when you see her throat getting slit, that's one thing. But then to put the knife straight back into in Cecilia's hand.
The speed of the editing of that movement, yeah.
It's just, you can see it all happening, and just that terror of just knowing she can't react because it's such a shocking thing to be going through. And then also just seeing everyone else's reactions around her, not understanding what's just happened. It's just that compound effect of what he's doing there is brilliant.
Yeah, and it's tricky to tread the line of not going into slapstick in those moments. So that, I think that is quite difficult to do. Where something incredibly violent and unpleasant happens, and another character is immediately set up as if they did that. Like when she slaps Sydney. She doesn't slap Sydney. When he slaps Sydney,
you were tricked,
and makes it look like it was Cece. And when her sister is killed, I think there might be other moments as well. I mean, with all the guards as well. Basically, in the big fight, it's kind of happening in there. It could slip into comedy in those moments of like setting her up for it, but it's all well handled through Moss's performance and the direction as well, to make sure that you're always taking it seriously and you're always on side with Cecilia. And
also just the people which were around Cecilia to try and make her feel safe. Like James Lanier, played by Aldous Hodge, who was this big, strong, burly guy who's supposed to be there to protect her, but just knowing that he isn't in a position to help her. And then when they do have that sort of face-off, when Adrian gets James and starts beating him up, and then James can't do anything about it, you really see like how futile it is trying to fight someone who's invisible, even though they're set up to be this protective character that can sort of save the day. And it's Cecilia who saves the day. She saves herself in this.
Yeah, she's cool. She's been through a lot. She's a very enjoyable protagonist. And she also becomes an invisible woman at the end as well. She kind of embraces it. She steps into his world a little bit, doesn't she? He's this mad science inventor. He's created this slightly horrifying suit that turns him into a supervillain, but she's able to take it on and use it against him, and she's willing to step into his world and do the things that he does. Does the same move on him, does the same move with the knife in the end, and learns from him.
Yeah, I mean, she had a terrible teacher, but she obviously picked up a few things, didn't she? Just in the way he's been conducting himself. And there's so many things in this film, like how he's manipulating his brother. And I suppose the Reign of Terror escalates again, doesn't it? Because it starts off with those kind of impish things that he does, and then it gets more and more graphic until he kills her sister, and he kills all of those security guards. He's completely off the wall by this point. The way she plays it is is so great. And it's that really satisfying moment of just being like, right, she got him, she's free. And she gets the dog.
Yeah, it actually saves the dog as well. Yeah, I was very invested in the dog, Zeus. But yeah, I think that stuff, he does go on a reign of terror, I suppose. But I think what's interesting about Adrian is that that's all in him at the start of the film, even though we don't really know him. But he's not changed by the experience. I think his experience of being invisible just allows him to do what he wants to do, which is control Cecilia as much as possible and really just force her to do whatever he wants her to do. And the suit just allows him to go further and further in pursuit of that goal. And he will do anything, he'll hurt anyone. There's a lovely little moment after when he holds a gun in the face of like the last guard standing, and then just sort of like slumps a little bit. You see the gun kind of fall to the side and he starts walking off. And you sort of start to think like, oh shit, he's kind of like caught himself in this reign of terror and is having a moment of consideration. And just as he's walking away, he kind of flicks the gun back and shoots the guard. And you don't even see the guard, you just see the gun go off. It's just that he can't stop himself, but it's not madness caused by the suit or anything. It's just enabling him to behave this way that I think is inherent to his personality.
Yeah, there's no change in him at the end like you get with Griffin on his deathbed.
Yeah,
there's nothing like that. He's just in utter disbelief.
I think he's maybe worse at the end of the movie because we see so little of Adrian. We don't see him in the film, and then this first scene that we get him, it's a charm offensive, and he's really trying to win her back. And you know, if we didn't have so much trust, I think, in Cecilia as a character, maybe you'd even be like, is he legitimate? Like, is this gonna end on a kind of like cliffhanger? I think that's even more scary, that he can just like switch back into the charm offensive, and he's so confident that he's so good at lying that he can even convince Cecilia, even as he's tormenting her by saying surprise, you know, using some keywords that, you know, he's still so confident in his own abilities. I think that's a very satisfying kind of epilogue to the film, to actually get physical Adrian visible on the scene, being terrifying with no invisibility.
And how Cecilia is able to, again, mirror what he's doing when she has that final chat with him. And she pretends to be, she's on the phone and she's like, oh no, blah, blah, something terrible's happened.
Yeah, she learned from the best. Yeah.
Completely just switches her entire demeanor. Yeah. And just watches him bleed out. It's poetic justice at its best.
Yeah, very satisfying and scary and great. And creepy in places as well. So another thing that we get in this is, because we have the suit, so there's kind of a new twist on the iconography. So instead of bandages, we have the suit. But it's the reverse, because the bandages are in place of the invisibility, but the suit is what enables the invisibility. So it's more reminiscent of, Predator, because we have this malfunctioning suit, and it's even making like a kind of growling sound
when
as
it glitches
malfunctions
out. Yeah, in the security, when he's fighting the security people.
And all the little cameras are like kind of like blinking and moving a little bit. I sent you a link to a Wikipedia article before we started recording for, what's it called? Is it called trypophobia?
Yeah.
Had you ever heard of this before, trypophobia?
I've heard of it because there's an American Horror Story series and they talk about that in like one of the first few episodes. But yeah, what is it? Fear of small holes?
Basically, that doesn't do it justice. So I have this a little bit. This is like, I don't think it's even sort of officially, it's halfway between like a real phobia and a meme. You know, it's I don't know how quote unquote real it is, but I do get a certain kind of feeling from those kind of images. I think I wouldn't describe it as a fear. It fills me with like utter disgust when I see those kinds of images. So yeah, Adrian in the suit, particularly when it's malfunctioning and making little almost wet blinking sounds, blinky poppy sounds. I found that very unsettling, but incredible creature design, you know, and very much living up to the kind of the rich history of the Invisible Man on screen. And
again, it's that he's doing something different with it, isn't he, old Lee Winnell? it's taking that, it's because it's incredibly difficult to expand upon that original iconography of the Invisible Man and do something new. And also with this, he's feeding into what people are afraid of now. That idea of technology's watching you. There's that whole Cecilia bit where she's checking her camera on her laptop to find out, just in case Adrian's watching her through that. This kind of idea that everyone is being put under surveillance the entire time. So that's what the Invisible Man is now. It's someone who is always there watching you, but just to give it that physical presence and throw in the technological aspect of these crazy cameras that are refracting light or whatever they're doing with the suit, really just brings it into the modern day in an interesting way.
And this is nearly 100 years after the film was made. It's well over 100 years after the book was written. I mean, it's a long way away from the book, right? I mean, I don't think you really even need to call this film The Invisible Man. I think you could title this anything and not really make any connection to H.G. Wells' story. But I think, again, it's sort of that the tropes and the iconography, that's what you're tapping into so that you can prime your audience with some expectations of what kind of Invisible Man this is going to be, basically. And then you just borrow from that and you can set things up and run with it.
It's also like marketable, isn't it? It's marketable,
exactly.
franchise, because it's the Invisible Man. People know what the Invisible Man is.
Yeah, he's part of the Dark Universe.
Part of the Dark Universe. That's it. And yeah,
it's good branding, James.
Good branding, but I'm glad it's not got any connection.
But no, you're absolutely right. It's a branding thing. So it's the two sides of the same coin, isn't it? The audience knows what they're going to get, and that's why it's good branding. So it works for the studio because it's very saleable. It's like, well, audiences know what they're going to get from an Invisible Man movie, but we're going to produce one that's inventive, creative, and adds a new spin, so they're going to enjoy it as well. But they know what they're paying for when they pay £20 to stream it at home because the pandemic's ruined cinemas.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that Blumhouse is continuously doing as well, trying to tap into that Universal. I think they've got some sort of deal with Universal because I think they also did The Exorcist. And again, they're trying to sort of bring in these big properties. The Invisible Man was kind of the gateway into that kind of stuff. So now they're getting hold of bigger horror properties. So they can kind of use their formula of low budget, high concept to create something different, but then take these bigger franchises, or big franchise names rather. I think all in all though, The Invisible Man still holds up as a quintessential mad science film as much as any other.
Yeah. And what I just think is interesting is this, both these films are amazing. I love them both. What's so interesting is this 2020 remake, if you can really even reasonably call it a remake, is how a remake should be approached. Because it makes it feel like this character is absolutely timeless and you can do it at any time. But I don't know how much of that is just Lee Whannell's just done a very good job with the film, and how much is it is actually a timeless character and it can be adapted. Maybe a bit of both. But he's pulled something off here as a director in making this film. And really I just think like it's so easy to be cynical and exhausted by remakes and reboots, but this is how you should be doing it if you want to do it. There's nearly 100 years between these films. That's a long time. And you just made it completely different. You made it interesting in a completely different way. And it works in every aspect. That's how you remake and reboot a film.
And especially in a film industry which is constantly about recycling and reversioning films, and when you're doing it like this and you're taking the elements that worked in the original but also looking at what works now and what would be an interesting story for people to hear in a modern day world, that's when you get the best films, because they've really taken the time, like you said, invert the story, tell it a slightly different way, come at it from a different angle, and still keep the essence of what made it so interesting at the same time and what made it what it was.
And also just genuinely funny that this came off the back of the 2017 Mummy, which is just like a dog shit remake that was a complete failure. It's just funny that they would then make, out of the ashes of that comes one of the best remakes I've ever seen.
And thank God that it did, because, yeah, look at what we got. This is what we could have won, and we did.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Journey Through Sci-Fi. If you've enjoyed us, make sure you subscribe to get more episodes of the show and never miss one.
And if you want to find us on the internet, we are all over the place. You can find us on various different social media websites. We've also got a website ourselves at journeythroughsci-fi.com, and you can come and join in the conversation.
And if you like us that much to come on our website and our social media, then why not support the show by leaving us a 5-star review with a comment saying what you like about the show. It's quick and easy, and it's a great way to get new listeners into the show, which helps us grow.
I thought you were going to say, and leave us a review saying it's quick and easy.
You can say that if you want. I actually don't care. Just leave us a review.
And if you like us even more, you can always sign up to our Patreon for extra bonus episodes and lots of extra content over there.
That's right. Plenty of episodes there, always brewing up little special treats for you. What have we got next time over here on the main feed, James?
So next time on the main feed, we are talking all about the Island of Dr. Moreau. Yes, another H.G. Wells story and the adaptations that came after that. So we've got a couple to look at next time on Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Exciting. Join us for that, folks. We will be back with you very soon.